The artifact lay dormant, hidden beneath the thick layers of dust on the uncharted planet. Nothing about it screamed danger or importance. To the untrained eye, it looked like just another piece of ancient debris, a forgotten relic from a bygone era. But as the human explorer, Eric, wiped away the dirt, a faint hum filled the air, barely noticeable at first, but growing stronger with each passing second. His heart skipped a beat, and his instincts screamed at him to step away. But Eric was not one to shy away from curiosity. He'd spent years of his life exploring the deepest corners of the galaxy, discovering lost worlds, and uncovering mysteries that others could only dream of. This was just another puzzle, one he was determined to solve. He leaned in closer, his fingers grazing the cool surface of the artifact. It was shaped like a small sphere, covered in intricate symbols he couldn't decipher. There was no indication of what it was or how it had come to be on this distant planet, tucked away from civilization for so long. The faint hum now reverberated through his body, making the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. A slight tremor rumbled underfoot, the ground shifting in a way that felt unnatural. Suddenly, a voice broke the eerie silence. "You shouldn't touch that." Eric turned around, startled. A figure stood in the shadows, hidden partially by the dense foliage of the alien jungle. The voice was deep and tinged with urgency, but the figure didn't step forward. Instead, the figure's body language suggested a deep, unsettling caution. "You don't understand," the voice continued, "what you found is not meant to be disturbed." Eric squinted into the darkness, trying to make out the figure, but all he saw was the outline of a tall, thin alien, the contours of its elongated limbs barely visible against the greenish glow of the jungle. Despite the strange appearance, the creature was humanoid, though its features were difficult to place. "What is it?" Eric asked, his voice filled with more curiosity than concern. "What's so dangerous about this?" The alien hesitated, then stepped into the dim light. Its large, black eyes reflected an unsettling mix of fear and wisdom, eyes that had clearly witnessed things most beings would never dare imagine. "That is a relic of destruction," the alien replied. "It's called Xalen. The most lethal substance in the galaxy. It can unravel entire civilizations without lifting a finger. The power it holds, it's beyond comprehension." Eric's eyes narrowed in disbelief. "You're telling me this little thing is capable of all that?" The alien nodded solemnly. "Yes. And no one, should ever control it. There are stories, legends, of entire worlds falling to nothing because of Xalen." Eric stood up straight, taking a step back from the artifact, but his mind was racing. He'd encountered dangerous artifacts before, but nothing like this. Nothing that carried this weight, this sense of looming doom. The alien's expression darkened. "You may think this is just a harmless object, but it is much more. Xalen is a catalyst for destruction. It's a force that brings forth chaos, something so dangerous that even the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy have been forced to wipe their records clean, to erase all memory of it." Eric glanced at the artifact again, his mind caught between the unknown power it held and the alien's warning. He had always prided himself on uncovering the mysteries of the galaxy, but now he wasn't so sure. The feeling that something was terribly wrong weighed heavily on his chest. "Take it, and you'll be marked," the alien's voice warned. "You won't be able to outrun it. Xalen has a mind of its own." But Eric didn't listen. The lure of discovery, the pull to understand, was too strong. And in that moment, he made a decision that would set the galaxy on a path no one could have predicted. He reached out for the artifact, his hand trembling with the weight of what he was about to do. Eric's fingers grazed the smooth surface of the artifact, and for a moment, everything felt still, unnervingly still. His heart raced as he held the Xalen, the very object that had the power to undo everything in its path. It hummed softly in his hand, as though it was alive, reacting to his touch. The alien's warning echoed in his mind. You won't be able to outrun it. But Eric couldn't stop. He had spent his life exploring the unknown, uncovering the secrets that the universe kept hidden. This was no different, or so he thought. There had to be an answer to its power. He needed to understand it, to control it, if only to ensure it never fell into the wrong hands. He turned to face the alien, whose eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. The creature's voice trembled as it spoke again, but this time with a sense of urgency, as if time itself was running out. Don't you see? You're making a mistake. This substance, it doesn't just destroy. It changes everything. And you have no idea what you're inviting by taking it. But Eric wasn't listening anymore. His mind was set. I'll be careful. I'll find a way to study it. There must be a solution. The alien stared at him for a long moment, then sighed, defeated. It knew that no matter how much it warned him, the explorer's curiosity would not allow him to turn back. With one final glance, the alien stepped back into the shadows and disappeared. Eric, alone now with his newfound burden, stood still for a moment. The quiet of the jungle surrounding him seemed louder somehow, more foreboding. He tightened his grip around the Zalan, and for the first time, a chilling thought crossed his mind: what if the alien was right? What if this was the end? But he quickly pushed the thought away. There was no turning back now. With the artifact in hand, he moved deeper into the planet's uncharted wilds, his path lit only by the faint glow of the Zalan. As the hours passed, the hum of the artifact grew louder, vibrating through his bones. It was subtle at first, almost like a distant echo, but soon it became impossible to ignore. His thoughts began to scatter, becoming erratic. He found himself muttering to himself in a strange language, one he hadn't remembered learning. Suddenly, a violent tremor shook the ground beneath him. The trees around him began to sway, and the jungle itself seemed to shift, as though it were alive. The air grew thick, heavy with an unnatural energy. Eric's pulse quickened as a cold sweat beaded on his forehead. He looked around, but there was no sign of any danger. Yet, he knew something was terribly wrong. The artifact in his hand pulsed with an eerie light, and he could feel a pressure building in the air. His heart raced, and a deep sense of dread settled over him. It was as if the planet itself had come alive, reacting to the presence of the Zalan. Eric stumbled back, his thoughts clouded. What had he done? He had thought that by holding the artifact, he could control it, but now it felt as though the artifact was controlling him. He could hear a faint whisper in the air, a voice not his own, but one that seemed to be coming from inside his head. Release me, the voice urged, and it wasn't the alien language. Was there any way to undo the damage he had caused? And then, the darkness consumed him. Eric's mind was engulfed by darkness, but it wasn't the peaceful nothingness of unconsciousness. No, it was a suffocating weight that pressed against his thoughts, making him feel trapped, as if his very soul were being compressed. The whispers that had been so distant now seemed to fill every corner of his mind, a cacophony of voices that were alien and ancient, yet familiar in some strange way. You cannot hide from me, the voice echoed inside his head, pulling him back into the reality of what was happening. It was no longer a soft whisper, it was sharp, like 1,000 voices shouting in unison. He gasped for air, the pressure in his chest unbearable. When his eyes snapped open, he found himself in a place he couldn't recognize. The world around him was shifting, blurring in and out like an old film reel. The jungle, the artifact, the planet, everything had disappeared. In its place was a vast, empty void. There was no ground beneath him, no sky above. Just an endless sea of darkness, stretching in every direction. And yet, there was light, faint, but pulsing in the distance, as though it was beckoning him. The Zalan hummed in his hands, its vibration thrumming through him like a heartbeat. It was as if the artifact had a mind of its own, and it wanted him to follow it. Come, the voice commanded again, louder this time. You have chosen me. Now, witness the cost. Eric staggered forward, his feet seeming to float above the ground. He couldn't control his movements, as though something else was guiding him, pulling him toward the light. The whispers intensified, louder and more frantic, like a storm of voices swirling inside his skull. He wanted to shut them out, but he couldn't. The voice had taken hold, and there was no escape. The light grew brighter as he moved closer, but it wasn't a comforting glow. It felt cold, unnatural, like the light of a dying star. And as Eric approached, he saw what lay beyond it. A series of images, flickering like snapshots of forgotten worlds, of empires falling, of civilizations vanishing into nothingness. He saw planets, beautiful and vibrant, torn apart by unseen forces. He saw stars go dark, their light snuffed out in an instant. He saw faces, alien faces, filled with terror as they ran from the very force that now consumed him. The Xalan, he realized with horror, had not only destroyed these worlds, it had erased them from existence entirely. Look at what you have unleashed, the voice whispered again, this time in a tone that was filled with regret. You are not the first. Many have fallen before you. The images flashed faster now, one after another, too quickly for him to make sense of them. Each one felt like a dagger to his heart, a reminder that he was part of something much larger, much more dangerous, than he could ever understand. And then, suddenly, the images stopped. The voice, too, fell silent. For a brief moment, everything was still. Eric stood alone in the void, the Xalan still pulsing in his hands. His body trembled, not from fear, but from the realization of the enormity of what he had done. He had taken the artifact, thinking he could control it, but it had already begun its work. The galaxy, his world, was already changing because of him. But the worst part wasn't the destruction he had seen. It was the feeling of being utterly powerless, unable to stop the force he had unleashed. The Xalan was no longer just an object, it was a presence, a force that had its own will, and it had already marked him as its next victim. Eric had opened a door he couldn't close. And now, there was no turning back. Eric woke up with a sharp gasp, his body jerking violently as if he had just surfaced from deep water. His lungs burned, desperate for air. The cold void that had enveloped him was gone, but the haunting echoes of the Xalan's power still rang in his mind, as if it had imprinted itself on his very soul. His hands shook, and for a brief moment, he wondered if the strange visions and the alien whispers had been nothing but a nightmare. But then he looked around and realized he was still on the planet, still in the jungle. Everything seemed wrong. The world around him felt warped, distorted, as if reality itself had begun to unravel. The ground beneath him was cracked, the trees twisted at unnatural angles, their leaves dark and shriveled. The air was thick, heavy with the same tension he had felt during the vision, and the Xalan still pulsed in his hands, humming like a warning. He stood shakily, wiping the sweat from his brow. His mind raced, trying to piece together what had happened. Had it all been real? The alien, the visions, the destruction? Was the Xalan truly the cause of it all? Suddenly, a low growl sounded behind him, sending a surge of fear through his body. Eric spun around, his heart pounding in his chest. In the distance, he saw them. Shapes moving quickly through the jungle, shadows that seemed to grow and shift as they approached. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. It was a pack of aliens, creatures he had never encountered before. They were tall, their forms sleek and menacing, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce the dim light of the jungle. They moved with purpose, their eyes fixed on him, their bodies tense and ready to pounce. Eric felt the weight of the Xalan in his hands, its power thrumming in his grip. These creatures, these aliens, they were here because of the artifact. They had been watching him, perhaps waiting for him to make a mistake. The Xalan was far more than just a relic, it was a signal, a beacon that drew those who knew its power. The aliens came closer, their eyes never leaving him. Their leader, a hulking figure with broad shoulders and sharp, jagged armor, stepped forward. The others remained at a distance, watching with an intensity that made Eric's skin crawl. "You should have left it alone," the leader spoke in a deep, guttural voice. His words were filled with a mixture of anger and sorrow. "Now, you've sealed your fate." Eric's grip on the Zalan tightened. "I'm not afraid of you," he said, trying to sound confident, though the fear in his chest threatened to choke him. "I can handle this." The leader's expression didn't change. "You think you understand the power of the Zalan?" His voice was colder now, filled with an edge that made Eric's blood run cold. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." "No one does." The alien stepped closer, and the air seemed to grow heavier with each step. Eric could feel the pressure building inside him again, the whispers returning, urging him to listen, to give in. He fought to keep control, but it was becoming harder to resist. "Zalan is not just a weapon," the leader continued, his voice low and menacing. "It is a force. A force that has shaped the fate of entire civilizations. It was used once before, in a war that nearly wiped out everything. No one can control it. Not even the strongest among us." Eric's mind was racing. He had heard rumors of ancient weapons that could alter the very fabric of reality, but he never thought he would encounter one. Now, standing in front of these aliens, hearing their warnings, he realized just how foolish he had been. "You've awakened something that should never have been touched," the alien said, his voice tinged with regret. "Now you must face the consequences." Eric's heart sank. He had been warned, but his ambition, his need to understand, had clouded his judgment. He had thought that by controlling the Zalan, he could unlock its secrets and use its power for good. But now, it seemed as though he had merely awakened a force beyond his control. The leader took another step forward, and the others began to close in around him. Eric felt the weight of their gaze, the pressure of their silent judgment, and for the first time, he realized that he was not the only one who feared the Zalan. He had come to this planet seeking answers, but what he had found was far more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. And now, it seemed, he was trapped by his own actions, by the very artifact he had so foolishly believed he could control. Eric's chest tightened as the leader of the alien pack took one more step toward him. The Zalan hummed louder in his hands, almost as if it were reacting to the alien's presence. He could feel its pulse beneath his skin, vibrating through his body, urging him to act. But act how? What could he do? He had no answers. Only questions. The aliens encircled him now, their glowing eyes watching him with a mixture of fear and disbelief. It was clear they saw something in the Zalan that he couldn't fully grasp. It was more than a weapon, more than a tool. It was a curse, one that had claimed the lives of countless beings across the galaxy. "You've awakened it," the alien leader said softly, almost pityingly. "Do you have any idea what that means?" Eric swallowed hard. He wanted to deny it, to say that he could control the Zalan, that it was just an artifact, nothing more. But deep down, he knew the truth. The artifact had power beyond anything he could imagine. The visions, the whispers, the way the world around him twisted, it was all the Zalan. It had marked him, and now it seemed to be dragging him down a path he couldn't escape. "I didn't mean for this to happen," Eric said, his voice barely a whisper. "I thought I could understand it. I thought I could control it." The alien leader's expression softened for a moment. "You're not the first to think that. Many before you have tried. None of them succeeded. And now, you will pay the price for their arrogance." The leader stepped even closer, his voice becoming more intense. "Zalan feeds on the desperate. It amplifies your deepest desires, your darkest thoughts, and twists them into something unrecognizable. It is not just a weapon, it is a corruptor. And once it has you, it will not let go. Eric could feel it now, the weight of those words sinking into his bones. The Zalan was feeding on him. It was taking hold of his mind, turning him into something else. His thoughts, once clear and focused, were now scattered. The alien's words echoed in his ears, merging with the whispers of the Zalan itself. He could hear it calling to him, urging him to let go of his resistance. For the first time since he had discovered the artifact, Eric felt truly afraid. Not of the aliens, no, they were just another part of this nightmare. He feared what the Zalan was doing to him. He feared what he was becoming. The leader continued to speak, but the words seemed distant, as if they were being filtered through a fog. You will bring nothing but destruction, Eric. You will lose everything you care about. Your mind, your soul, all of it will be consumed by the Zalan. Eric clenched his jaw, trying to push the growing panic down. He had to resist. He had to keep his sanity. He had to find a way out of this. But how? The Zalan was inside him now, twisting his thoughts, making him doubt everything he had ever known. A low growl rumbled from one of the other aliens, breaking through his spiraling thoughts. The pack began to move, closing in on him, their eyes filled with something that wasn't just fear, there was something deeper there, something primal. You've seen what it can do, the leader said, his voice cold. You've seen the destruction it leaves in its wake. You can't turn back. It's already started. Eric's breath quickened. The ground beneath him felt unstable, like it was shifting, like the very planet was reacting to the Zalan's power. The air was thick with tension, and his mind raced, trying to think of a solution, a way to stop this madness. But it was already too late. He could feel the Zalan taking control, its power beginning to overwhelm him. He was losing himself, piece by piece, to the very artifact he had thought he could control. As the aliens closed in, Eric's vision blurred, and he heard the Zalan's voice again, clearer now than ever before. You are mine, it whispered. And there is no escape. Eric stumbled backward, his mind a whirlwind of chaos. The Zalan's whispers were deafening now, filling his head with promises of power, but also threats of destruction. It was like the artifact was speaking directly to his soul, bending him to its will, pushing him towards something he couldn't understand. The alien pack around him stood still, watching, waiting for something, perhaps his surrender, perhaps the moment when they could intervene. But Eric wasn't ready to give up yet. He couldn't be. Not after everything he had learned, not after everything he had lost. He shook his head, trying to clear the fog in his mind. The Zalan was inside him, twisting his thoughts, clouding his judgment. But he couldn't let it win. He couldn't let it destroy everything he had fought for, everything he believed in. His heart raced, his breath quickened, but there was still a part of him, deep down, that wasn't ready to give in. The alien leader stepped forward again, his eyes locked onto Eric's with a mixture of pity and caution. You don't understand, do you? The leader asked, his voice calm yet filled with an underlying urgency. The Zalan doesn't just control you. It becomes you. Once it takes hold, there is no escape. You are forever changed. And you'll drag everyone around you into the abyss with you. Eric's grip on the artifact tightened, his knuckles white. I can stop it, he said, his voice hoarse but determined. I can still control it. I just need to understand it. The leader's expression darkened. You don't control it, Eric. It controls you. You cannot fight it. No one can. The words hit Eric like a punch to the gut. He wanted to deny them, to argue, but deep down, he knew there was some truth to what the alien was saying. The Zalan wasn't just an artifact. It was a force. A force that had been alive for centuries, maybe even millennia, consuming everything in its path. He could feel its grip on his mind, tightening with every passing second. It was like a cold hand wrapped around his heart, squeezing tighter with each breath he took. But even in the face of that overwhelming fear, Eric refused to give in. He had to fight. He had to try. "Please, help me," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The words felt strange coming from his mouth. The Zalan, it seemed, was trying to drown them out, but there was still a small part of him that was fighting for control. "You know more about it than I do. Please, tell me how to stop it." For the first time, the alien leader hesitated. The other members of the pack remained still, watching closely, as if waiting for the signal. After what felt like an eternity, the leader spoke, his voice tinged with something akin to regret. "You cannot stop it now. But you can contain it. You can fight the pull, for a while." He paused, his gaze heavy with meaning. "But you must choose, Eric. You must choose whether to save yourself, or destroy everything around you." Eric's heart pounded in his chest as the leader's words sank in. Could he really do it? Could he fight the Zalan's power long enough to find a way to destroy it, or would he be consumed by it, like so many before him? The Zalan's presence grew stronger within him, louder, more insistent. It was like a fire raging inside his mind, threatening to burn everything down. Eric's thoughts began to scatter, his vision blurring as he felt himself slipping away. His grip on the artifact weakened, but just before he lost all control, something deep inside him snapped. No. Not yet. Not without a fight. He focused every ounce of his willpower, trying to push back against the Zalan's influence. The alien leader watched him closely, sensing the struggle within him, but making no move to intervene. This was his battle. It was a battle for his mind, for his very soul. The pack waited, but there was no turning back now. Eric had made his choice. Eric's body trembled as the power of the Zalan surged through him, fighting against his will, trying to break him down. He could feel it clawing at his mind, threatening to tear him apart. His thoughts were a blur, and for a moment, he wondered if he was even still himself anymore. The Zalan had claimed him, just as it had claimed countless others before him. But something deep inside him refused to give in. The alien leader, watching with solemn eyes, spoke softly, as though knowing this was the moment Eric would either sink or rise. "You can fight, but it won't be easy," the leader said, his voice filled with both warning and a strange sense of hope. "The Zalan feeds on the will, on the desperation of those who think they can control it. It will stop at nothing to make you its slave." Eric felt a surge of anger, a flash of defiance that cut through the overwhelming pressure in his mind. He wasn't going to let this thing win. He wasn't going to be another casualty of the Zalan's dark power. His hands shook violently, but he held on to the artifact, refusing to let it slip from his grasp. "Then I'll fight," he whispered, his voice hoarse but resolute. "I will fight with everything I have." The Zalan's hum grew louder, like a storm brewing, as though it were reacting to his defiance. The jungle around him seemed to tremble, the air crackling with energy. The pack of aliens stood back, waiting to see if Eric would be consumed or if he could somehow break free. For a moment, there was only silence. The Zalan had reached its peak, its power almost overwhelming, but Eric fought against it. He dug deep into himself, searching for something, anything, that would give him the strength to break free. And then, something shifted. A flicker of clarity broke through the storm of voices in his mind. The Zalan had fed on his fears, his doubts, his desires. But now, in this moment of utter desperation, Eric realized something. He had always been the one in control. He had always been the one to choose how to act, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The Zalan thrived on chaos, on surrendering to its power. But Eric could resist. He could stand firm. He could push back. The artifact pulsed one last time, its hum reaching a deafening pitch, but Eric pushed through. He focused every ounce of his strength, his resolve, and his will on one singular thought: he was not a slave to this thing. He was a human, with the power to choose, to fight, to survive. The hum of the Zalan suddenly stopped. The artifact went still in his hands. For a moment, it felt as though the entire universe had paused, holding its breath. And then, the ground beneath him stopped trembling. The jungle returned to its natural state, as though the very fabric of reality had been mended. The mist that had surrounded him faded, and the dark presence that had filled his mind was gone. Eric lowered his hands, the Zalan now silent, dormant, its power contained. His breath was ragged, but he was alive. The weight of the artifact in his hands no longer felt like a burden, it was a tool. It was a reminder of the choice he had made. The alien leader stepped forward again, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and awe. You did it, the leader said softly. You broke its hold. Eric nodded slowly, still catching his breath. I did, he replied, his voice steady. But it's not over. This thing, it's too powerful to be left alone. I need to find a way to destroy it. To make sure it never hurts anyone again. The leader watched him with a new understanding. You will need help. The Zalan cannot be destroyed by one alone. Eric looked around at the alien pack, at the creatures who had once feared him. He had been given a second chance, and he wasn't about to waste it. He didn't know how, but he would find a way to destroy the Zalan, to make sure it never threatened anyone again. And with that, the journey was far from over. The Zalan may have been contained, but its power would always be a lingering shadow. Eric had learned that sometimes, the greatest strength lies not in controlling power, but in knowing when to resist it, and when to seek help. The universe was vast, filled with unknown dangers. But Eric had faced one of the greatest threats it could offer, and he had won. The lesson was clear: no matter how powerful an enemy may seem, humanity's greatest strength is the will to never give up, to always fight for what is right. And as long as he had the strength to fight, Eric knew he could face whatever the galaxy threw his way.